The Temple Israel member who should be making this introduction is not this rabbi. It's this rabbi's wife, Cheryl Grassgreen, who grew up with the Dees family. My mother-in-law was the Girl Scout leader for his daughter Ellie's troop. My sister-in-law, Lisa, and Ellie were so close, they used to spend the night at each other's homes on Friday nights like this, including one night when the Klan entered Morris Dees' property, and my sister-in-law and Ellie, his daughter, were taken to a cupboard to hide in before the Klan was taken off his property. You can imagine my father-in-law got the call. "Everything's all right, Richard. What are you talking about? The Klan was around, but they're gone now." So this Shabbat is personal, since Morris Dees and I both have roots in and a love for Montgomery, Alabama, where the love of my life and my beautiful wife, Cheryl Grassgreen, and her family were good friends. Another random, relevant point is the day I moved to Memphis in 1991, the National Civil Rights Museum was dedicated. And when my mentor, Rabbi Danziger, told me about our discretionary funds, I remember the first contribution I made from the rabbi's discretionary fund was to the Southern Poverty Law Center, whose visionary founder was and is Morris Dees. And I've been a member of this leadership council ever since, because for the last 24 years I have found this place to be holy ground and a sacred cause. Another commonality I share with our High Holy Day speaker is being occasionally oblivious at times. Now, permit me to explain why I'm oblivious and he's oblivious by way of something that happened on this very pulpit 17 years ago. I was the younger assistant rabbi, quietly excited that our Rabbi Emeritus Harry Danziger and others were bringing my hero Morris Dees to Temple. I'd always wanted to thank him, this family friend, for inspiring the book chapter on civil rights I co-wrote with my father, and what has become my lifelong passion and commitment to Judaism and civil rights. It was January of 97. I was 34. I had all his albums, Season for Justice, Hate on Trial in 93. Cheryl and I moved here the year of In the Line of Fire, the Morris Dees story. It came out. I think Corbin Burnson played you. Back in those days, there were two lecterns at the time, rather than a unified one. So Morris was over there, and the crowd to his right was blocked by the Sabbath candles. Before delivering one of the most powerful justice sermons I have ever heard on this pulpit, as a courtesy to those whose view were blocked beside Rebecca and Max, was right over in those seats, Mr. Dees blew out the Sabbath candles. There was apparently, this was a courtesy because no one could see, there was apparently an audible gasp that neither Mr. Dees nor I heard, because I was so transfixed by the power, conviction, goodness, and eloquence of his message to seek justice, fight hate, teach acceptance and understanding for generations to come, that when Mr. Dees finished his talk, he came back. We had these 4 lazy boy seats back there, and he was beside Rabbi Danziger, and I was on the other side, and he came back, and he said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "That was unbelievable." I was referring to his talk, not to blowing out the Sabbath candles. Some of you were there and probably don't remember his talk as well, but tonight you will. Tonight you will, because the light Morris Dees has kindled for justice is so much greater than 2 candles. The light of this speaker led Judge Keith Ellison to describe Morris Dees, the University of Texas Law School, as, quote, this generation's most valiant and effective soldier in the fight for civil rights and civil liberties. I don't have many regrets, but I'm going to have one 3 weeks from now when I can't be in two places at the same time. As rabbi, on October 25th, I will be leading 40 members of our high school confirmation class on their annual trip. Were I not obligated to do that, I would be in Montgomery, Alabama, with the other leaders of the Leadership Council for the establishment and dedication of this, the Morris Dees Legacy Fund. It's an event I have a ticket to. Would want to be at more than any football or basketball game. Athletes are not my heroes. Courageous souls like Morris Dees are. And Morris, who came here, he only travels 6 to 8 times a year. He flew in just for this High Holy Day Shabbat. We have made from Temple Israel a significant gift to the Morris Dees Legacy Fund that you'll be receiving probably when you land at the office after your travels this weekend. Speaking of courageous souls, and with this I close, there's one rabbi, there are a number of rabbis here, Rabbi Danziger, Rabbi Hinchin, Rabbi Bowman. There's one rabbi no longer alive, smiling down on this Sabbath, in addition to Rabbi James A. Wax. As Tennessee's oldest and largest synagogue, Morris, we have only had 8 senior rabbis serve temple in over 160 years. Number 4, from 1915 to 1924, Rabbi William Feinschreiber was the first clergyman, there were no clergy women, unfortunately, at that time, the first clergyman in all of Memphis of any faith to speak out publicly against the Ku Klux Klan. His grandson told me when he visited that Rabbi Feinschreiber slept with a gun in his bed from the threats he received. If only he and we had someone like you then to go after the funding of hate and bigotry groups in this country. But thank God we have you now seeking justice for the most vulnerable members of our society. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to Temple, only with a greater distance from the Sabbath candles, the founder and chief trial counsel for the Southern Poverty Law Center, Morris Dees. So glad you're
Thank you. Thank you, Micah. I noticed they put the candles way over there. But I do remember coming here before, and I wondered what y'all were doing with a teenage rabbi. That's why you've only had 18 rabbis in 150 years, you know. But he still looks like a teenager. He jumps around like one. I'm really, really honored to be here during this holiday, Rosh Hashanah time, this new year. And because my life has always been, pardon me, tied up with religion in one way or another. And when I stand in this beautiful temple here, I think about that little small country church that I went to in Pike Road, Alabama, rural Montgomery County, cotton farming community. And I was thinking about, as I sat there, like I was listening to Micah, you know, and the beautiful songs and music and beautiful sayings, as kind of a mentorship to this congregation. And I think about the mentor in my life. She was my Sunday school teacher in that little Baptist church, and she was also my 5th and 6th grade teacher in that school that had about probably 75 total students. Several of us were in classes in one room. And I think they closed that school to get rid of Mrs. Vera Bell Johnson. She taught my dad, she taught me, and she taught 2 of my sons. And she wanted us to grow up to be good citizens, to make a contribution. And I remember there was one thing that she said that we could not do if we're going to be good citizens, and that is that we could not drink alcoholic beverages. Now, she was really stern about this. She had a button about this big around, and I know she got it during that days of the Prohibition Amendment because she led the troops in Montgomery County, Alabama, I'm positive. And on this button it said, "Lips that touch wine shall not touch mine." And she died an old maid. And she was going on and on one day in the classroom on her temperance lesson, and I'm 12 years old, and I'm a lawyer to be, and I remember the inconsistency. I don't know whether she told us in school or in Sunday school, because we had Bible verses in both places back then, but she said, I said, but Miss Johnson, you told us that last week that in Jesus, in one of his miracles, turned water into wine. And she said, "Yes, Morris Dees, but we'd have thought a whole lot more of Jesus if he hadn't done that." And I was glad. I may join this church here because I was glad to see the wine in the reception down there today. But she used to take us out in front of that little school and with the other students, and we'd raise the flag on the flagpole, and we'd stand around there, and one of the things we did was do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. And I remember as we held our hands on our hearts and repeated that pledge, some words from that pledge stuck with me, and words that she repeated us when we got back in our classroom in many occasions. One nation with liberty and justice for all. It wasn't much that I could do about things then, but she did inspire us to want to help those who were the least among us. She always said that the colored people, as she called them, were not being treated fairly. But it took another one of my neighbors, a citizen from Montgomery, after Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on that bus, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King made a valiant attempt to make justice for all have meaning. A man who had to face many of his contemporaries who had little vision. He had to face politicians who had no backbone. And finally, in this city, in 1968, he faced an assassin with no conscience. Dr. King told us an old story once that I think he had a reason for telling us this story, and it's a good story to tell on a new year because we look back to see where we've come from and we look forward to see where we're going. When he walked among us, he had serious doubts that our nation, our democracy, would continue. And why shouldn't he? His people were treated less than second class. You know the deprivations they suffered throughout this nation, not just not the right to vote, but so many other basic, fundamental things that we take for granted. And this story that he told us, I heard him tell it once. As a reminder, it was a story about another nation, a nation that started with great purpose and great goals and aspirations for its people. And along the way, this nation fell by the wayside and failed to live up to its promises. The story is about the children of Israel. After they had been released from slavery and after they had wandered in the desert for 40 years and finally crossed the Jordan River, Dr. King said they built a great city called a city-state back then. And people prospered in this new city, this new town. They built great walls around it. And on the inside of these walls, they had a banking system. They had schools. They had a police. They had a court system, very much like today. And in the middle of this big town, this inside of these walls, was a great marketplace where people from far and wide brought their products in to sell. And one farmer who came from a neighboring village outside of these great walls, he got there early in the morning, as Dr. King told the story. He got there early in the morning with his wagon laden with things to sell. And he saw things that bothered him as we waited for those gates to open. He saw able-bodied men and women reaching out begging for a few grains from his wagon. And he inquired, and he found out that, well, if you didn't belong to the right group in this town, you didn't get a fair shake. You didn't get a good job to feed your family. Maybe you didn't get a job at all. And then when this farmer got in the marketplace, he put his products out in the stall, and he heard grumbling from the people walking by. And he learned that, well, maybe if you weren't in with the in crowd here, if you wasn't part of the establishment here, maybe you got arrested for things that other people didn't get arrested for. And this concerned this farmer because he knew what these people, these ex-slaves, had suffered. He knew what they were trying to accomplish when they built this great city. And he asked for an opportunity to speak to the leaders, like going before the city council. Well, he was a man of some good reputation in the community he came from, and they gave him that opportunity to speak. I'm sure you know who this farmer was. He was the biblical prophet Amos. And Amos stood before these people in that ancient city, and he said, you know, folks, you got a good thing going here. But unless you're fair to all the people, you're not going to get to keep what you have and pass it down to future generations. And unless you're fair to all the people, I predict that one day there won't be one stone left upon another of this great city. And he closed his comments with the words that Dr. King delivered in his famous speech in 1963 in Washington, pleading for another generation whose nation was not giving them equal opportunity. Amos said, folks, let's don't be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. When Dr. King was making that speech in 1963 in Washington, he said that in this great ocean of opportunity that we call this nation, there are islands of poverty and despair and injustice. Now, we fast forward over 45 years since Dr. King left us, and in this nation today, we still find those islands of poverty and injustice in our nation. And as we celebrate this new year, the thing to look forward to is making our nation the nation of liberty and justice for all. You know, I think one of the problems that we're seeing in our country today is the results of a changing America. When I was back in that little country school in 1948, 15% of the people of our country were people of color. Today it's 37%, and in some states it's even, like California and New Mexico and Texas, it's much greater. And that is causing an enormous amount of fear in people in this nation who feel like that people who are not like them or us are getting things that they don't deserve, whether it be health care that we have to pay for or whatever these things are. They're people, they don't deserve this, they're ours. We know this has caused the reactions among our country in many ways. We see a deadlocked Congress today, a gridlock, because they can't figure out how to divvy up the goods and services of this country. We see an enormous increase in the number of hate groups. Since President Obama got elected, there are over 1,500 different hate groups, militia groups, and others in this country, a fourfold increase since the election of President Obama. And today, the things that I used to sue these hate groups, and I would get their material and read it, and read their websites. Well, you don't have to do that today. You can just turn on certain television stations, and you can hear the same thing. It's been mainstreamed. You know, I think that what Dr. King would tell us today, and the lesson for us, is that the march for justice continues in so many places, in so many ways. So many young people today, when they come to the Southern Poverty Law Center and they stand around the Civil Rights Memorial that Ma Lin designed that lists the lives and stories of the 40 men, women, and children who died. They think, well, the Civil Rights Movement is over. We're going to celebrate this is the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. Next year is the 50th anniversary. And young people, come there to learn history. But that beautiful fountain that Ma Lin did, water comes cascading over a wall that's like 50 feet tall in black granite, and on the wall are the words, "Don't be satisfied until justice rolls down." And then it comes across the names of those 40 men, women, and children, this giant 30,000-pound block of granite, the water pours over it. And I always tell young people, when you look down, what do you see? Well, they see the names of the people that are there, the 4 little girls that were killed in Birmingham, Violet Uzo, Dr. Martin Luther King. It tells a bit about their stories. And I said, no, look a little harder. What do you see? What you see is a reflection of yourself. And what you have to do is decide what role you're going to play in the next civil rights movements in our country. You know what they are. One giant one is this whole issue of health care. This very wealthy nation provides health care that's substandard to 15 or 20 other countries, and our longevity of life is lower than what we call some of the third world countries. And we're fighting over how we're going to handle this health care. I'm not sure if it's because President Obama sponsored it, because Richard Nixon also tried to get it done. Many other presidents did, but it's not popular today because of this changing America we live in. We have some great things that came out of our government. We have, we had Social Security, and we don't call that Roosevelt Security. And we have Medicare, and we don't call that Johnson Care. Maybe one day history will prove that President Obama was right. We'll have to see. But it's these issues, that the economic disparity among our people today, the fight over the rights of the LGBT community, and so many other issues that are front burner civil rights issues. But the one that is probably the most troublesome and the one that's causing the most problem is the increasing diversity of America. As you know, most of you here and came during, I'm not sure what time frame in our history, but maybe like my people, you came as Irish people because you couldn't stay where you were. And when we got here, there were signs that says no Irish Catholics should apply for a job here. And Irish people were lynched in New York and Philadelphia and other places for stealing American jobs. And when Jews came from Eastern Europe, the plight and the things that they had to put up with. And it's same with the Chinese and same with so many other people. And so many people came to this country not in freedom ships, but on slave ships. But we all kind of worked it out together, and we all made this nation great. But when I grew up on that little farm in Montgomery County, Alabama, I didn't understand what diversity was. There were the black people that worked the cotton fields and the white people that owned the fields. And I didn't think about diversity in that respect. My parents didn't own any land, so I guess I was lucky because I was put out there picking cotton along beside my African-American friends, and they're friends of mine today, and it really shaped my life. But it took a case that I represented, my Southern Poverty Law Center, myself and other lawyers, to make me understand why this nation is great because of our diversity, the very thing that's ripping us apart today. After the Vietnam War, approximately 500,000 Vietnamese were brought to this country. Refugees from communism, had they stayed behind, many of them would have been killed. But they were brought here and settled all over this nation by religious groups and others. And when these people landed, they went to work. About 50,000 was settled in the Houston, Galveston Bay area, and it wasn't long before they took over so many kinds of businesses, car washes, fruit stands, just numerous businesses. And about 40 or 50 of those Vietnamese decided that they wanted to go into the shrimping business, the fishing business, like they did in the warm waters around Saigon Harbor in Vietnam. But they didn't have the money to buy these $300,000 and $400,000 trawlers that the American fishermen used. And there were 500 or 600 American fishing boats plying those waters up and down that coast. So these Vietnamese industrious, hardworking immigrants, they began to pool their little monies together, and they brought old broken-down boats, $4,000 and $5,000 boats. No American fisherman would ever take one of them out, but they fixed them up, and they went out to fish. And it wasn't long before they were out fishing the American fishermen. And that, I don't know any other way to put it, but the American fishermen became jealous. And they went to the Texas legislature and said, pass a law not allowing these people to have fishing licenses. These are American waters. These are our fish. And the Texas legislature, they didn't check the path of the fish, but they said, we can't do that. We can't do that because they're our friends. And besides that, this is a free enterprise country, and they have the right to fish. Well, that didn't set well with a group of these American fishermen. They had a big association, but a few of the very disgruntled ones turned to the world's most continuing existence terrorist group, the Ku Klux Klan. In that case, the Texas Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Shrimping season opened about a month away, and their idea was to frighten these Vietnamese fishermen so they wouldn't take their boats out to fish. They burned 2 or 3 of their boats. It's hard to prove who did it, but I guarantee you they weren't burning their own boats. They burned a giant cross down at Kemah, Texas, where Clear Creek Channel comes out to the water where boats go out to the open waters. And the Vietnamese became frightened. And so they put their boats up for sale. And I got a call, fortunately for them, from a lawyer who did real estate work for them and said, would you come and see what your group can do? I go down, and I remember so well walking up and down the dock in Kemah, Texas with Nguyen Van Nam, the leader of the Vietnamese fishing group. And I saw those little boats just bobbing there. You've probably seen them, little glass wheelhouses. Each one had a for sale sign in it, the kind of sign that you'd get in a hardware store. And I said, Nam, we can bring a lawsuit here. Shrimping season was 2 weeks away. We can ask the federal court for an injunction. A lot of different theories we had, and we had done some investigation. We had the help of law enforcement, and we can get an injunction, and if against these people from interfering with your right to fish, and if they violate that court order, they'll go to jail for criminal contempt of court. He said, okay, and we went to work. And we found a number of American fishermen who didn't like what they had seen either. They had been in the homes of these people. They knew them, they liked them, and they knew they were good, hard-working people. And so we had a good case, and one of the American fishermen had been threatened. They had burned his dock down if he let the Vietnamese park there, his boat there. That's exactly the testimony we needed. We were ready to go to court for this injunction a week away from shrimping season opening when I get a call from Colonel Nguyen Van Nam. He said, Mr. Dees, drop the lawsuit. I said, no, Nam, we can't do that. But if your group wants to drop out, I got to tell the federal judge there's no case. I said, but before you do that, would you give me an opportunity to speak to the Vietnamese fishermen and the Vietnamese leaders in the community? And the leaders had told him, let the Klan have the fishing. We're worried about our other businesses. Well, later that evening, Sunday afternoon, I talked to them at 7 o'clock that night. I was in a little Catholic church with a priest there interpreting. There was about, 150 people sitting there, much like you here. Many of them had the clothes they wore to this country in. And they sat very patiently. And I said, folks, America is a nation of laws. Laws that protect the minority from the majority if the majority is breaking the law. Don't sell your boats. Don't do that. Because if you cut and run now, they'll come after everything you have. And I know that you people might not know it, but that was another group of people who had their rights violated. And you probably don't know the leader. His name was Dr. King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And they had their churches bombed and burned, and they had people shot. But they continued throughout their reign for seeking their rights, they continued to use America's justice system. And they went to court time and time again. And had they not, they wouldn't have gotten their rights as soon as they did. I left that room, and I'm sure there was a pretty contentious discussion afterwards because these people were afraid. I saw fear in their eyes. They knew the Khmer Rouge. They knew terrorists. I get a call about 11 that night, and Nguyen Van Nam said, continue the case. We put on a good case, and the federal judge gave us a very powerful order naming a large number of individuals and putting under an injunction not to interfere with the Vietnamese. That made the people very happy, and I was invited down to the blessing of the fleet. Got down there about, I guess, 5 o'clock at Kemah, Texas, at the dock where the boats go out into the open waters. And that was about 50 or so family members there, and there was a Catholic priest there to bless the boats, and didn't see any boats, didn't hear any, and the fog was hanging heavy over the bay, and about 25 or 30 minutes later, a boat popped out through the fog and came by the dock, and the priest blessed that boat and another, until 15 or 20 boats had gone out into the open waters. The sun began to burn through the fog, and as I looked to my right and my left, I could see the sun glistening off the badges of the United States Marshals that had been sent there to enforce that court order and to protect these new Americans. And as I looked into the faces of those family members as those boats went by, I could see an enormous amount of pride as they found their place at America's table. And not just finding their place at America's table, but building that table, so to speak, for a greater America, like so many immigrants have done in the past who come to this country. And I'll have to tell you, as I stood there that morning in May, that cool breeze blowing across the bay, I'll tell you, I felt not only proud to be a lawyer for these people, as I saw the majesty of our justice system at work, I felt proud to be an American. And as we think about what we face today in this country, the fear that's been generated by the large number of Latinos who come to this country, I would say what I would probably have said in 1850 if had I been standing in front of a group like this in Boston. I'd say, folks, let me tell you one thing. Before 100 years passes, one of my people from Ireland is going to be elected president of the United States. I'd have probably been booed off the stage. But I predict that before this century's over, we'll have a Latino president of the United States. We have a woman first. She could be Latino, probably not, but we're going to have one. If I get my votes, you won't. But we've got a lot to look forward to as we think about what's going to happen this next year. And there are a lot of things to be sad about in this world today. It seems that, I don't have it took me a long time to learn the New Testament. I'm just getting to the Old Testament. But somewhere in the Old Testament it says in there, there'll always be wars and rumors of wars, and I don't know where it is, but I'm pretty sure it's true because all you got to do is just look around. And so many of them are fought in the name of religion. And there's a lot of things, and crime, diseases around the world, and so many things. But I promise you that the arc of justice bends towards right. And each of you in this congregation here, as well as the rest of the people in this great nation, you hold the keys to the gates of justice. That's an awesome responsibility. Each one person has got a responsibility to seek justice from your neighbors, your friends, and this country. Human rights begin close to home, in our schools, in our communities, and in our workplaces. And unless we can find equality and justice in those places, then we'll look in vain for progress in a larger world. And I'm confident that what you're doing here in congregations and religious groups and students all over this nation are doing, if you were a bunch of students, I would say this to you. I'd say that one day somebody's going to write a story about your generation. It'll probably be on a Kindle. It won't be in a book. But I predict that it'll be a story about America's greatest generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.